Well, it's been a few weeks since we talked to our friend Rabbi Yaakov Menken, Managing Director for Coalition for Jewish Values. He's joining us on KCMO Talk Radio because maybe the story really hasn't subsided. It is still the major global story of the moment. But some want it to subside. Of course, we've had this ceasefire that was taking place. And then, of course, there was more terrorism committed by the Hamas group last week. So we're following that. We still have a number of Americans who are being held hostage by Hamas. So, Rabbi, good morning. Welcome on the KCMO in Kansas City. We appreciate you being here. Where has your head been at? What have the conversations that you've been having the last few days really been about as this ongoing conflict continues between Hamas and Israel?
Good morning. Well, it's really in two sections because you have to talk about what's going on in Israel, and you also have to be talking about what's going on in the United States. And the biggest problem that Americans have to deal with is the barbarians are no longer at the gate. They're in the halls of academia, and they're walking the halls of Congress. This is, we're looking at what's going on around the country as this completely false narrative, using complete lies about the history of that region of the world to create a mythological Palestinian people and claim that their land is stolen, such that at Columbia they're now organizing an event which will characterize the atrocities and the pogrom of October 7 as a, quote, counteroffensive. It's simply unbelievable. It's openly racist. It's bigoted. It's everything that America claims to stand against.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right about that in terms of what's happening here in the U.S. I saw last night or over the weekend there were issues in Philadelphia where you had these protests outside of Jewish businesses, basically threatening them. I know we talked about this a few weeks ago, but are you surprised that this has not subsided? And in many ways, it seems like it's only gotten worse.
The fact that it has not subsided does not actually surprise me. It surprises me that it started at the intensity that it did, that a group called Students for Justice in Palestine would claim to be part of Hamas and rejoice in what happened on October 7, and that universities didn't immediately respond by shutting them down. I mean, I've been pointing out for a decade that this is a racist organization and a hate group. They only celebrate terrorists and murderers and anti-Semites at the Goebbels level. So how is it that this was ever allowed on campus? But nope, they said, oh, no, this is not a problem. They're actually a civil rights movement. And this is the co-opting of actual civil rights on campus just to celebrate hate. And understand, everybody who's advocating for a quote-unquote permanent ceasefire now is either a moron or deliberately lying so that more Jews get killed. Because Hamas has broken every ceasefire there ever was from 2007 up to 2 days ago. They said if given the chance they will rearm, regroup, and October 7 will be merely the dress rehearsal for what they're doing next. Are you kidding me? You want to have a ceasefire is what happens after you eradicate that terror organization. Mm-hmm. Nobody talked about a ceasefire when the United States was prosecuting the war in Iraq. The removal of Saddam Hussein had to happen. Well, guess what? The removal of Hamas, which is just ISIS on steroids, needs to happen. And this complete double standard against Israel is something with which not only Jewish people, but world history is very familiar.
Yeah, and what a lot of these folks I don't think understand, Rabbi Yaakov Menken, Managing Director for Coalition for Jewish Values, if they could kill thousands of Americans, they would happily do that as well right after they're done with the Jews. I mean, I don't think these people understand that when they do this whole kind of show sympathy. And that's what they're doing. It's showing sympathy for Hamas. It's not about the Palestinians. Yes, they're innocent Palestinians. That's indisputable. But you and I both know this is really kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod in many ways towards Hamas and showing sympathy towards them as much as anything else, which is just disgraceful.
They don't actually, they're not pro-Palestinian at all. A person who is pro-Palestinian is concerned for the fact that Palestinians cannot have certain jobs, careers, or education in Lebanon. That they are concerned about the fact that they don't have the right to vote, the right to speak out, choose freedom of association, choose freedom of religion, any of those things, not in Gaza, not in the Palestinian Authority. In both of those areas, if a person sells property to a Jew, they'll be sentenced to death. I mean, that's a person who's concerned about Palestinians would be concerned about those things. You don't hear these people talk about any of those things. The only thing they're pro is terrorism.
So what about, when you hear this continued talking point from folks who say, well, we just need that final two-state solution. What is your response to that, Rabbi?
It's the reason why it's idiocy, and yes, it's coming out of the Biden administration and others, is because the Israelis have been prepared to make peace for 75 years. It's always been about genocidal Arab armies refusing to make that peace. And now the Palestinian Authority rejoiced in what Hamas did. Hamas, of course, rejoiced in what. So exactly who is willing to live peacefully side by side with Israel? Look at the map of Palestine. Every indigenous population, the idea that modern political borders trace a person's ancestral homeland exists nowhere off a small island. I mean, even the British and the Scots and the Welsh couldn't manage that, right? You just don't get an indigenous homeland that happens to trace the borders. Look at the borders of the so-called Palestine, according to both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. It's a takeover of Israel. That's all it exists to do. That's not a two-state solution. That's a one-state solution with all the Jews exterminated and expelled.
So what about the public foreign policy that has been on display from the administration? I mean, Joe Biden has said a lot of right things, but I don't know. His actions, are they speaking louder than his words as they continue to push for extended ceasefires? We're still struggling to figure out how many Americans are being held hostage, how to get them back. We obviously know there are still, 100-plus Israelis who are being held hostage. So what about the foreign policy here and how the next few weeks should play out?
Yeah, notice, by the way, that nobody who talks about collective punishment talks about Hamas tormenting the Israelis by holding people, civilians, hostage, a 4-year-old, a 9-month-old, kidnapped from their homes. Nobody talks about the collective punishment when the victims are Jews. Then it's totally okay. They should have intervened. In fact, Hamas said so. They should have intervened with their government. The Biden administration has honestly has been way ahead of where I thought they would have been throughout this story. So much so that it's actually dividing the party. And that's, obviously that's great for conservatives, but the bottom line is that the left wing of the Democrats really need to be expelled all along. Hopefully, Biden will not get wobbly knees. That he will hold the course, because up until now he really has been backing moving 2 carrier groups into the Mediterranean to make sure that Hezbollah didn't escalate the situation from the north for Israel. That's been very, very helpful. Pressure for a ceasefire is obviously not going to be helpful. There has to be this commitment on the part of the civilized world to stay the course to fight terrorists. Never mind that the terrorists want to kill Jews. They're terrorists, and like every other terror group, we have to get rid of them. We're not going to judge the Jews by a double standard. That's not so hard, is it?
Shouldn't be, Rabbi. It really shouldn't be. Hey, we appreciate you being here as always, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us on KCMO in Kansas City.
Thanks so much.
All right. Rabbi Yaakov Menken, the managing director for Coalition for Jewish Values on KCMO. Good to have him on the show as always. 913-408-7957 as we approach 8:45 on a Monday on KCMO.